of the schools regarding safety at the high school. Dr. Tremblay, welcome. Thank you for coming, and we'll let you open up with Mr. Albright.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. A special thanks to all the teachers who are in the room and educators who are here this evening. Thank you for being here. Some of whom I started the day with at 8 o'clock this morning at King. So it's nice to see some of you again here 12 hours later. And so thank you for all your service to our schools. And I also want to apologize for the hate speech that we had to endure this evening on behalf of everybody who had to listen to that. It's a difficult position for the chairman and for the council and any political board, as it's required under the law that you have to endure those moments. And even though I didn't sing along with the Baby Shark song, it is, but it's an interesting indication, and it actually builds into what I'm going to discuss a little bit tonight around certain rules that apply that make it very difficult to do business. And by that, I mean, we have certain boundaries when we talk about behavior in school. And I'm widening this topic a little bit because I think the interest here, I don't think everybody here is tonight is interested in necessarily, fights at Framingham High School, though they might be. But certainly looking at some of the folks in the room, this is generally about student safety, staff safety across the district, which is why I think it was on the agenda and it became an opportunity to come in solidarity and in support. And I appreciate you all being here. I want to use tonight, I know I'm not going to go through, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I gave you a document. You may or may not have had a chance to see it. It was just done yesterday, late evening. I don't expect that you have read it. But I want to highlight when you do look at it, just to set some context for it. So the memorandum is really addressing high school and generally behaviors in what we're doing in the school district, but also some important linked documents. And I just want to talk about those briefly. Let's be upfront about this and be fully bottom line up front. We have behaviors manifested as communication in our schools that include biting, hitting, kicking, punching, swearing at staff, all the things that make us wonder why we do what we do or how could this possibly happen in our schools, and with a thinking of these sort of bad kids need to be out. And there's a mindset there. And I would want to remind everybody that a lot of the students that we're seeing come from deeply traumatized environments. And this is a manifestation of their behavior is communication. I'm not saying that it's right or that it's acceptable. I'm not saying that the code of conduct, which we refer to as the code, I'm not going to detail that lengthy document. That is in the frequently asked questions link. But there's been this sort of perception that the code is soft, that we're giving kids a hug instead of a consequence. And there may be. Okay, right, okay. I don't know, Mr. Chair, that's fine. The crowd goes wild. But the idea is there's time for both. But certainly the code itself does not exclude consequences. We don't, and I respect Councilor Cannon for reaching back to me. He'd asked some questions and said, Bob, what I would want to have heard from you is that we don't tolerate violence in our schools, period. And I appreciate that. And I want to echo that. But I want to echo that there's some truth to that we don't tolerate that, and to the extent that we can. But I also want to set the parameters that there are laws that govern this. Right, so the code of character has sort of these 5 zones of when a student is behaving in a certain way. That's holding to the side that students are coming from complex backgrounds, and we have a lot of social support. In fact, we have 121 staff dedicated to social, emotional, mental health across the Framingham Public Schools. That's a significant increase over the last 7 or 8 years, right? So this is work that we're continuing to do to refine. What I would characterize as some of our challenges, having spent time in all of our schools and talking with principals, is about 1%, at the high school probably closer to 2% of our student population that's really demanding 99 or 98% of the staff resources. And some of the challenges that are created there is that when we were sending staff to be responsive as a triage unit, that we're not able to provide, the educators behind me are not able to provide services that are in IEPs, services that students need in social groups, and the kinds of things that happen. So we've got to find a better way to tighten that timeline. The timeline between when a student is eligible for IEP, for example, or when they need regular education services. So we have the resources, we have the staff to do that. One of the areas of concern, we discussed this morning at King, for example, is just how do we get the students' needs met sooner? Because if we see a student escalating behavior on day one of school, and it takes us 45 days to actually get support in place, it becomes very problematic for a lot of people, right? Not the least of which are the students themselves who need the support. So we are looking at that. We're having what I'm calling these sort of 1% meetings. They're scheduled this month. They'll be with as principals and with support teams to identify the 1% in their school. So take King as an example. Since King is here, roughly 400 students. There are about 4 students that I've observed in the school and that we're watching very closely and paying attention to. It's nothing I haven't said already this morning to the King staff who are here. So I'm trying to be very careful tonight in respecting the fact that this is a specific item to the Framingham High School, but also acknowledging at the same time that there's concerns around student behaviors broadly. The idea that we're going to take kids and send them out of school, suspending them, is sort of out of sight, out of mind. It's not necessarily helping the student to become a better human being, to become socially able to manage those behaviors in spaces. In fact, we're not positive if you send a student home in that case that there's supervision or they're not in a more unsafe situation, right? So you have in-school suspension as another alternative where there's some restoration. Ultimately, at the end of the day, every single one of us in this room, if we made a mistake or we had a behavior, we would want somebody to take some care of us and find out what's causing that and to try to restore it. That's the idea of restoration. So it's not just about giving the hug, it's about having a conversation. It's about deepening the relationships with the student, with the families. Some families are very cooperative. They want to work with the school department. They're frustrated too. The behaviors are at home. They're not just at school, and they don't know what to do. So we're trying to educate and help kids at school and at home, and we know that in some cases it is creating a disruption. But to simply say that that child can't be here, go someplace else, well, where is that other place? And how are we serving anyone well? Because every child has a right, not a privilege, but a right to public education. And so the demand has outpaced the supply of resources. We have, there are students who well deserve outplacement services for their child that need something more than what the school can offer. Not that our staff aren't highly skilled, but we need something that's deeper, that's more trauma informed, and that has more, just more support for what that specific child needs in a smaller environment. Those demands, like not dissimilar from an emergency room ER, that the supply of those spaces is not quite available. There's a delay of time from when you can get a student to those places, if it's even appropriate, of data collection. That's required under the law. Suspending a child from school, like once upon a time, whether it was right or wrong, or you think it's the good idea, we should go back to the old days, it is not allowed under the Massachusetts General Law. There are now 3 sections under Massachusetts General Law 37H, 37H and a half, 37H and 3/4. And it depends. If a child's out of school for committing some sort of crime, their condition of returning to school is contingent upon an adjudication in court. Right, so there's all kinds of very nuanced details. So it's not as simple as how can we let these behaviors in school continue? Nothing is being done about it. I will tell you that our suspension rate, if you're the person that likes suspensions, then you'll be happy to know that our suspension rate is 107% higher this year than it was last year. If you're a person who thinks that that's wrong and there should be more restoration and the suspensions are not good, then you'll say that suspension rate's 107% higher than it was last year. What are you doing about it? Same idea about SROs, by the way. You'll recall there was conversations in this community about SROs. We don't want them in the school. Or now we do want them in the school. So at any point in time, there's a position one way or the other that's pretty much split down the middle about whether we're doing enough, not doing enough, putting the right supports, or having too much of the supports in place. We have a serious mental health challenge in front of us. That's not a Framingham Public School problem, but we don't care necessarily about the world. We care about Framingham, and I get that. But we've got to acknowledge the fact that we have a problem, and I'm not sure what I could ask you for tonight that fixes that. I'm not sure what the City Council could say, we're prepared to give you X, Y, and Z to make this problem better. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that ask is. We have nearly 10,000 students and about 1% to 2% at the high school. It's creating some challenges and distractions from our work, and there's kids crying for help that need support. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to have conversations to see how we can reallocate our district resources. We'll continue to put it in the budget to add more if we can. One of the other pieces, with budget contingent, of course, one of the other areas is I think we just have a lot of students at the high school. You know, you have 2,600 or so students. Look at Brockton. They're just dealing now with 3,900 students. Teachers are having a mutiny in Brockton. And now the solution is we're going to just restrict cell phone use. Now, understandably, why that would be, right? Because what's happening is instead of students, I'm not I don't mean to paint this with a broad brush, but in a time when students could either ignore, stand up and be upstanders, instead we have a mass population of people standing up and taking video and sending videos to you and to this entire group and sensationalizing it with the media. And look how bad things are. And yeah, it's not great. By the way, fights aren't new in school.
No.
Fights used to happen a lot outside of the school. I talked to the police chief about that. He goes, Bob, things used to get settled outside of school, but now it's all coming into the school. And I made a comment some people took some exception to, but I want to provide some context to that. When fights happen in school, and I made a comment to the media on this, and I mean it, is when a student comes into school and they have a fight and they choose to do it in school, it's for their own safety. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying that they're doing this because they know it's going to get broken up. And people don't necessarily want to be in that situation to encounter that. And talking to acting principal, and I'll introduce him in a second because he's here tonight next to me too, and I thank him for that. Most of the cases of fights in school is really with students who are known to one another. These aren't random acts that are happening. I was talking with Mark earlier. We're not shoving kids into lockers and these things that are happening in crowded hallways or in crowded cafeterias. So one way we want to remedy this is we have to reduce the enrollment overall at the high school. Well, how do you do that without building a new school? So there are some solutions underway that we're considering. We have a very successful start to a student success academy. I would argue that we have a very large footprint of a high school that's largely vacant after 3 o'clock. What are we doing about evening opportunities for students? What are we doing about the Thayer campus as an alternative now that Mass Bay has moved out of Farley? And I would argue that by moving, and this is a plan of mine, it's not a surprise to anyone at Thayer. My plan is to move the Thayer campus to Farley and expand the capacity so that we can have more students who fit the profile of being undercredited and over age or older, and then we can move some of the numbers out. By doing a sort of a multi-pronged approach to that, we can reduce some of the overall numbers at the high school, have less concentration of students. In addition to that, we have to really work with our legislators as well. We have some challenging placements, best interest determination placements that are happening in the city of Framingham. They're putting students, because they live in certain places in the city, that are coming to the Framingham Public Schools, which may, I would argue, are not the best fit for Framingham High School. So we have a lot of complex problems in this city, starting from 5 on. And so it's not just a high school problem. So I'm glad everyone's here because this goes back all the way to kindergarten. So we have a duty to fix this, and how we're going to address it is my approach to this is we're going to see how we can close the gap between the time we first see the behavior in a student at age 5, at age 4, at age 3, and how we can allocate resources sooner to help that child to give them what they need, because we know that the behavior is a manifestation. In some cases, it's a means of communication, and that's creating some challenges for us. And if it's not addressed, and as the student gets older, it manifests itself, as you see with fights and things in the high school. So that's just a broad overview. And again, I was trying to be mindful of the ask this evening. It was about safety at Framingham High School. I wanted to address that, but also to acknowledge everyone who's in the room and why they came here this evening. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it to you for member questions. And certainly, I want to thank Mark Albright, who's the acting principal right now at Framingham High School, longtime resident, a longtime educator, administrator, parent, and as well as Scott Penrod, who's Director of Safety and Security for the Framingham Public Schools, who's here this evening as well. So I'll turn it back to you. Thank you for the time this evening.